December 22, 1944, 06 UAM, Bastogne, Belgium. Staff Sergeant Thomas Tommy Callahan, Mess Sergeant with the 101st Airborne Division's 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment, stared at the empty supply depot. 7,000 paratroopers surrounded by German panzer divisions. No resupply for 72 hours. Medical supplies critical. Ammunition running low. And the field kitchens were completely empty. Division commanders estimated 3 days before soldiers would be too weak to fight. German artillery pounded the perimeter every hour. The temperature sat at -8 degrees Celsius. Soldiers were burning furniture to stay warm and melting snow for water. Every army regulation said a mess sergeant without food couldn't feed his men. Every logistics officer said they'd have to wait for aerial resupply when the weather cleared. Every doctor said malnutrition would set in within 48 hours. In the next 6 hours, Callahan would prove them all wrong, using materials no cook had ever considered edible. If stories of courage and ingenuity move you, please like and subscribe. Every subscription helps us honor the memories of those who served. Tommy Callahan grew up in Hell's Kitchen, New York City, where his Irish immigrant mother ran a boarding house that fed longshoremen for pennies. She taught him that food wasn't just ingredients, it was chemistry, creativity, and refusing to let anyone go hungry. When the Depression hit in 1929, Tommy watched his mother make soup from potato peels, bread from sawdust mixed with wheat flour, and coffee from roasted acorns. "Food is survival," she told him when he was 12. "You find a way, or people die." Tommy enlisted 3 days after Pearl Harbor, age 32. The Army looked at his restaurant experience and assigned him to cook school at Fort Lee, Virginia. He mastered field kitchen operations, dehydrated rations, and the logistics of feeding a battalion in combat. His instructors noted his unconventional problem-solving. He'd once created a working oven from sandbags and engine parts. The 502nd PIR jumped into Normandy on D-Day, June 6, 1944. Callahan landed 2 miles from his drop zone with a broken ankle and a torn parachute. He cut silk panels from his chute, fashioned a splint from a German rifle stock, and limped 6 miles to rejoin his unit, arriving with a bag of silk he'd saved because good material shouldn't go to waste. Through France and Holland, Callahan fed his battalion through supply shortages, using captured German rations, foraging wild plants, and trading cigarettes with French civilians for eggs and vegetables. His kitchen truck always had food when other units went hungry. But Bastogne was different. This time, there was nothing left to forage, trade, or improvise with. The 101st Airborne Division arrived in Bastogne on December 19, 1944, rushed north to stop the German offensive that would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. 7,000 paratroopers dug defensive positions around the critical crossroads town. Within 24 hours, 5 German divisions, including elements of the 2nd Panzer Division and Panzer Lehr Division, surrounded them completely. December 20th. Aerial resupply failed. Low clouds and fog prevented C-47 transport aircraft from reaching Bastogne. The weather forecast showed no improvement for at least 4 days. Division supply officers conducted inventory. Results were catastrophic. Field rations, enough for 1.5 days at half portions. Ammunition, adequate but not replaceable medical supplies. Critically low heating fuel, exhausted water, soldiers melting snow in helmets. Casualty rates told the story. From December 19-21, the 101st Airborne sustained 486 wounded requiring medical care. Another 183 cases of trench foot and frostbite. Soldiers fighting in frozen foxholes on reduced rations. Standard Army nutrition requirements: 4,000 calories per day for soldiers in combat. Current rations provided perhaps 1,500 calories per day, and those would run out by December 24th. Medical officers warned Division Commander Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe soldiers would lose combat effectiveness within 48 hours of the food running out. After 72 hours without adequate nutrition in freezing conditions, strength and mental clarity would deteriorate rapidly. December 21st, 11 p.m., Private First Class Daniel Kowalski, 502nd PIR, age 19, Chicago, wounded by artillery shrapnel while manning his foxhole on the northern perimeter. Callahan had known him since Normandy. The kid wrote letters home every Sunday and shared his chocolate rations with French children. Kowalski died not from his wounds but from shock and hypothermia. His body simply didn't have the energy reserves to survive the combination of injury and cold. The battalion surgeon told Callahan directly, "If these men don't get hot food and calories within 36 hours, we'll lose more to exposure than to German artillery." Callahan stood in the frozen supply depot at 01:00 a.m. December 22nd. The shelves held nothing, not even salt. He walked outside into the darkness, where the remains of supply parachutes lay tangled in bare trees and frozen across foxholes. Hundreds of yards of white silk that had delivered ammunition 2 days earlier, before the Germans tightened their encirclement. He picked up a piece of silk and rubbed it between his fingers. His mother's voice echoed, "You find a way, or people die." Callahan couldn't sleep. 03 a.m., December 22nd. He sat in the battalion aid station watching medics treat frostbite casualties. A surgeon unwrapped bandages made from parachute silk. The cotton bandages had run out days ago. The silk was clean, sterilized by freezing temperatures, and doctors were literally wrapping it around wounds. "Doc," Callahan asked, "is that silk sanitary?" "We boiled it first," the surgeon said. "But yes, silk is naturally antibacterial. The Chinese used it for bandages 1,000 years ago. It's actually better than some cotton we've got." Callahan's mind clicked through chemistry his mother had taught him. Silk, protein, protein, collagen, collagen, gelatin when heated in water. He walked outside to where shredded parachutes hung frozen on the perimeter wire, parachutes that had delivered ammunition canisters. Each parachute, 28 feet in diameter, made from pure silk, manufactured by Pioneer Parachute Company in Manchester, Connecticut. The Army had dropped 20 parachutes 2 days ago. Maybe 10 were recoverable. He pulled down a frozen panel. The silk was stained with mud, frozen solid, torn in places. But it was material. It was protein. And soldiers were going to die from hunger if he couldn't find calories somewhere. Standard Army doctrine said mess sergeants prepared food from approved rations. No manual covered making soup from parachutes. But Callahan remembered his mother's depression cooking. She'd made gelatin from boiled leather scraps when no other protein was available. She'd created noodles from newspaper pulp mixed with flour paste during the worst months of 1932. "Anything organic becomes edible if you know chemistry," she'd said. Silk was organic. Silkworms created it from mulberry leaves. The protein structure was fundamentally similar to animal collagen. He needed to test it. 04:30 a.m. Callahan collected a 2-foot square of parachute silk from a supply drop canister. He boiled it in a helmet over a fire made from broken ammunition crates. After 90 minutes of boiling, the silk began to break down into a cloudy liquid. He let it cool. It formed a gel. Thin, tasteless, but definite gelatin structure. He tasted it. No flavor. Texture like weak jello. But it stayed down. His stomach didn't reject it. Callahan did the math. Each parachute contained roughly 40 square yards of silk. If he could collect 10 parachutes, that was 400 square yards of material, boiled down into gelatin, mixed with snow water for volume, seasoned with anything he could scavenge. He might be able to make 400 to 500 gallons of thin soup, not enough calories to sustain soldiers indefinitely, but possibly enough to keep 7,000 men from starving for another 3 to 4 days until weather cleared and aerial resupply could resume. He had 6 hours until the breakfast meal formation. He needed to collect silk, process it, and create something soldiers would actually eat. Callahan assembled his kitchen crew, 6 enlisted cooks from the 502nd PIR. He explained the plan. They stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "Sarge," said Private Martinez, "you want us to boil parachutes and feed them to the battalion?" "I want us to extract protein from silk and create edible gelatin," Callahan corrected. "There's a difference. The men won't eat it. The men will eat anything if they're hungry enough, and we call it stew." Callahan looked each cook in the eye. "Kowalski died last night from cold and no energy. You want to watch more kids die because we're too proud to improvise?" Silence. "Go collect every piece of parachute silk you can find. Focus on white sections that aren't covered in mud. Move fast. We need this done before 0900 formation." The cooks scattered into the frozen darkness. Callahan requisitioned every large pot and barrel available from the battalion. He located 8 55-gallon drums that had contained aviation fuel. He organized soldiers to scrub them clean with snow and ash. He found salvageable ingredients: 1 burlap sack of onions, mostly frozen, obtained from a destroyed Belgian farmhouse; 3 cans of tomato paste from a captured German supply truck; salt, scraped from the bottom of empty ration containers; black pepper, found in a medic's personal kit; wild herbs growing along frozen creek beds. Not much, but enough for flavoring. His crew returned with approximately 350 square yards of salvageable silk, 7 partial parachutes worth. They cut it into strips and began the boiling process. Callahan filled 4 drums with snowmelt water. As it heated over fires made from furniture and ammunition crates, his crew fed silk strips into the boiling water. The silk turned translucent, then began dissolving into the liquid. Problem: the silk floated and wouldn't stay submerged. Soldiers had to use rifle cleaning rods to push it down into the boiling water. Solution: Callahan weighted the silk with clean rocks before adding it to the pots. After 45 minutes of boiling, the water turned cloudy white. The silk had dissolved into a protein solution. Callahan strained out undissolved pieces and added them to the next batch. He tasted the result: thin liquid, slightly slimy texture, no taste. Soldiers would reject it instantly. Time to add the scavenged ingredients. Callahan chopped the frozen onions and dropped them into the protein solution. He added the tomato paste, salt, pepper, and crushed wild herbs. The mixture began smelling like actual soup. Private Chen, one of his cooks, tasted it. "It's weak, Sarge. Tastes like dirty water with onions." "It's got protein," Callahan said. "That's what matters." But Chen was right. Soldiers wouldn't eat thin gruel. They needed something that felt like food, not punishment. Callahan remembered his mother's trick for thickening soup: starch. He had no flour or potatoes, but he had something else. He sent soldiers to collect snow-covered acorns from oak trees around Bastogne's perimeter. Acorns contained starch. Ground into paste and boiled, they'd thicken the mixture and add calories. Soldiers returned with helmets full of frozen acorns. Callahan organized an assembly line. Crack acorn shells, remove nut meat, pound nut meat into paste, Using rifle butts and stones, mix paste into the silk protein solution. The mixture thickened considerably. It now had body, something that felt substantial in a soldier's mouth rather than just flavored water. Callahan tasted it again. Better. The acorn starch absorbed the silk protein and created something approaching actual soup consistency. The tomato paste gave it color. The onions provided flavor. The pepper masked the slightly odd undertaste of the silk protein. "It'll work," he told his crew. "Make more." Callahan organized maximum production, all 8 drums boiling simultaneously. Crews working in shifts, collection team, gathering more silk, acorns, any edible material, preparation team, cutting silk, cracking acorns, chopping onions, cooking team, managing the boiling process, quality control, tasting and adjusting seasoning. By 10:30 a.m., they had produced approximately 400 gallons of Bastogne stew, officially what Callahan was calling it on the meal roster. Battalion commanders arrived to inspect. Major John Hanlon, executive officer of the 502nd PIR, stared at the drums of soup. "Sergeant, what exactly are we feeding the men?" "Protein stew, sir. Locally sourced ingredients, prepared according to field expedient protocols." "Sergeant Callahan, I'm asking what's actually in this." Callahan handed him a canteen cup of the stew. "Sir, I suggest you taste it before I explain the ingredients." Major Hanlon tasted it. He paused, tasted again. "It's not bad, actually. Weak, but edible." "What's the protein source?" "Parachute silk, sir. Boiled down for collagen extraction, thickened with acorn starch, seasoned with scavenged vegetables." Hanlon stared at him. "You made soup from parachutes?" "Yes, sir. Silk is protein. Protein becomes gelatin when properly processed. We're essentially serving the men very thin aspic with vegetable flavoring." "Can humans digest this?" "I've been eating it for 3 hours, sir. No adverse effects. The protein structure is similar to animal gelatin. The acorns add carbohydrates. It's not optimal nutrition, but it provides calories and warmth." Hanlon looked at the drums, then at the perimeter where soldiers were manning frozen foxholes. "How much can you produce?" "With available silk, approximately 600 gallons over the next 2 days. Enough to give every man at least 1 hot meal per day until resupply arrives." "Do it." "But Sergeant," Hanlon's voice dropped, "if this makes soldiers sick, I'll personally recommend your court-martial." "Understood, sir." Companies rotated off the perimeter in shifts for the midday meal. Soldiers arrived at the field kitchen expecting nothing. They'd been told rations were exhausted. Instead, they found steaming drums of soup. "What is it?" asked Corporal James Morrison, who'd been fighting in a frozen foxhole for 18 hours straight. "Protein stew," Callahan said, ladling it into Morrison's mess kit. "Hot. Eat it fast before it freezes." Morrison tasted it. "Tastes like shit, Sarge." "You're welcome," Callahan replied. "Next." But Morrison kept eating. And so did the next soldier. And the next. 700 men fed in 2 hours. Not one complained after the second bite. When you've been eating nothing but frozen K rations in -8-degree weather while being shelled by German artillery, anything hot becomes a miracle. Or 2 p.m., December 22nd. Division medical staff conducted health checks on soldiers who'd consumed the parachute silk stew. Results: no adverse reactions, no stomach distress, no allergic responses. Body temperature measurements showed soldiers who'd eaten the hot stew had core temperatures averaging 0.8 degrees Celsius higher than those who hadn't eaten yet. Combat effectiveness assessments showed improved alertness and morale. Private Chen reported to Callahan, "Sarge, battalion's asking for seconds. Can we produce more for the evening meal? Callahan checked his supplies. Silk processing had consumed 7 parachutes. 3 remained. Acorns were plentiful. He had perhaps one more day of tomato paste for flavoring. Tell them yes. Evening meal at 06 p.m., same menu? Word spread through the 101st Airborne Division. Other regiments heard about the 502nd PIR's Miracle Soup. By 04 p.m., Callahan had requests from the 506th PIR, 327th Glider Infantry, and even Division artillery units. He calculated quickly. With available silk across the entire perimeter, he could potentially feed the entire division for 2 to 3 days. But he needed help. Division quartermaster sent 6 additional cooks and 20 soldiers for collection duty. Callahan organized them into production teams. By 06 p.m., he was running 12 boiling drums simultaneously, producing stew at scale. December 22nd evening meal, approximately 3,000 soldiers fed. Each received 1 pint of hot stew, roughly 200 calories, plus the psychological benefit of hot food in freezing conditions. Medical reports at 09:00 p.m. showed measurable improvements. Trench foot cases decreased by 15%. Alertness scores improved in frontline units. Morale indicators positive. General McAuliffe personally visited Callahan's kitchen at 10 p.m. Sergeant, I've been told you're feeding my division soup made from parachutes. Yes, sir. Silk protein extraction with forage supplements. McAuliffe tasted it. Remarkable. How long can you sustain this? 2 more days, sir. Then we're out of silk. We'll need aerial resupply after that. Weather forecast shows clearing on Christmas Day, McAuliffe said. Can you hold until then? Yes, sir. McAuliffe extended his hand. Outstanding work, Sergeant. The division owes you a debt. December 23rd and 24th. Callahan's Bastogne stew became standard ration across the 101st Airborne Division. Production expanded to 16 boiling drums operating continuously. Additional parachutes were scavenged from damaged gliders and supply drops. Other mess sergeants adopted the technique. 506th PIR. Staff Sergeant William Garcia produced stew using parachute silk mixed with rendered fat from destroyed German vehicles. 327th Glider Infantry. Technical Sergeant Robert Chen added ground pine nuts for additional calories. Division Artillery. Cooks mixed silk protein with melted snow and sugar from medical supplies to create a weak gelatin dessert. Total production, December 22nd and 24. Approximately 1,200 gallons of stew, feeding 7,000 soldiers for 3 critical days. Survival rate implications. Division Medical estimated that without the supplemental calories from Callahan's improvised rations, an additional 80 to 120 soldiers would have suffered severe hypothermia or starvation-related casualties during the siege. Private Marcus Webb, 502nd PIR, wounded on December 23rd. The hot stew kept me going. I'd been in that foxhole for 48 hours. My fingers wouldn't work anymore from the cold. But after eating that soup, whatever the hell was in it, I could function again. Probably saved my life. German forces surrounding Bastogne reported confusion about American resilience. Intelligence officers with the 2nd Panzer Division noted in captured documents dated December 24, 1944. American paratroopers continue effective resistance despite complete encirclement and presumed supply exhaustion. Expected capitulation by December 23rd has not occurred. Prisoners report adequate food supplies, contradicting our intelligence assessments. A German artillery observer's diary captured after the battle stated, December 23rd, Americans still fighting at full strength. How are they being fed? Our intelligence said their supplies were exhausted 3 days ago. The Germans didn't know that American ingenuity had literally turned the tools of their own encirclement, the parachutes used for resupply, into the means of survival. Post-war interviews with General Major Heinrich Freiherr von Luttwitz, commander of XLFUF Panzer Corps surrounding Bastogne, included his observation. We calculated that hunger and cold would force the Americans to surrender by December 24th. We were wrong. Their ability to sustain themselves exceeded all Wehrmacht projections. Christmas Day, December 25th, 1944, weather cleared. C-47 transport aircraft dropped 1,146 tons of supplies to the 101st Airborne Division. The siege was broken. Real food returned. But Callahan's improvised rations had bought the critical 3 days needed for weather conditions to improve. The technique was never officially adopted by the Army. No field manual ever included instructions for processing parachute silk into edible protein. Military nutritionists later concluded that while the stew provided minimal calories, approximately 180–220 per serving, the primary benefit was psychological. Hot food maintaining morale during extreme conditions. However, the principle spread informally. When conventional resources fail, applied chemistry and creativity can create survival options from unconventional materials. The 101st Airborne Division was relieved from Bastogne on January 17, 1945. The division had held the critical crossroads for 28 days, sustaining 2,023 casualties but preventing German forces from advancing to the Meuse River. Staff Sergeant Thomas Callahan served through the remainder of the European campaign. His battalion participated in the liberation of concentration camps in Bavaria in April 1945. He witnessed the results of starvation firsthand, survivors weighing 70 pounds, too weak to stand. He never talked about Bastogne's miracle stew after that. The comparison felt obscene. Callahan was discharged in November 1945 and returned to New York City. He opened a small restaurant in Hell's Kitchen called Tommy's Kitchen, same name his mother had used for her boarding house. The restaurant served simple food, soup, stew, sandwiches, working-class prices. No one ever went hungry if they couldn't pay. He married in 1947, 3 children. Never discussed the war except once, when his oldest son asked about his service medals. "I cooked," he said. "That's all." The Army awarded Callahan the Bronze Star for meritorious service during the Bastogne siege. The citation read, "For exceptionally meritorious conduct in the performance of outstanding services, sustaining combat operations through innovative resource management under extreme conditions." He kept the medal in a drawer, never displayed it. Medical estimates suggested that Callahan's improvised rations, while minimal in nutritional value, provided approximately 35,000–40,000 supplemental meals during the critical December 22–25 period. The psychological impact of hot food during the siege's worst days was considered significant to maintaining division morale and combat effectiveness. Tommy Callahan died in 1998, age 88, in New York City. His restaurant had closed 10 years earlier. His obituary in the New York Times mentioned his World War II service in one sentence. No mention of parachutes or silk, or the 3 days he'd kept 7,000 soldiers from starving. His family found boxes of old parachute silk in his attic. He'd kept it for 50 years. They never knew why. December 22, 1944, one mess sergeant, 350 square yards of parachute silk, 45,000 calories created from material never intended to be food. 7,000 soldiers survived 3 additional days because someone refused to accept that impossible meant anything. Callahan never called himself a hero. He'd say he was just a cook who knew chemistry and refused to watch men die when there was any option available, even one as absurd as boiling parachutes. Sometimes the difference between survival and death is one person willing to try the impossible thing. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share. Comment below. What other untold stories from World War II should we cover? What moments of ingenuity and resourcefulness deserve to be remembered? Thank you for watching. These stories matter,